The sun hung low over our cul-de-sac, casting honeyed light across the tightly clustered homes. Each house, a clone of its neighbor, sported immaculate lawns and carefully pruned hedges. It was a neighborhood that prided itself on conformity, a world where even the wildest of pines dared not grow askew. It was here that Karen, our self-appointed arbiter of neighborhood etiquette, thrived. With her hair pulled tight and her gaze sharper than a hawk's, she prowled the sidewalks, sniffing out infractions with the keen nose of a bloodhound. I watched her from my porch, a steaming cup of coffee warming my hands as she stopped to scrutinize my lawn. A single dandelion waved defiantly in the gentle breeze. Karen squinted at it as though it were a personal affront. She produced her phone, snapping a picture with the satisfaction of a lioness bringing down her prey. It was a small thing, really, a weed among the grass. But to Karen, it was a harbinger of chaos. I sipped my coffee, savoring the earthy bitterness. I could feel her eyes boring into me, daring me to respond. Instead, I leaned back, letting the chair creak beneath my weight. A subtle symphony of defiance. Karen moved on, her heels clicking against the pavement like a metronome, marking time, her head high with a self-righteous tilt. Her invasions were not new. They were as regular as the sunrise, as inevitable as the tide. Her kingdom was this street, and she ruled it with an iron fist wrapped in pastel colors. Everyone knew this, and everyone bent to her will, or so she believed. Inside, my son played with his toy soldiers. A miniature battle spread out across the living room floor. I watched him, marveling at his concentration. "Dad, the enemy is advancing," he said, his voice filled with the seriousness of a general strategizing his next move. I chuckled softly, the sound a low rumble in my chest. There was a certain poetry to life's symmetry, Karen, the petty tyrant outside, and my boy, the earnest commander within, both engaged in their own battles, one of clashing wills, the other of plastic armies. But my son was oblivious to Karen's world, to her rigid rules and harsh judgments. His world was simpler, innocent. I intended to keep it that way. As the afternoon stretched on, I returned to the porch, greeted by the sight of a fresh notice taped to my door, a warning, no doubt, about the dandelion. It fluttered in the breeze, a white flag of Karen's relentless campaign. I left it there, untouched. It was not defiance, but rather a choice of peace over pettiness. This was my fortress, my sanctuary, and there was strength in knowing that her paper threats held no power here. The day waned, shadows lengthening across the street. I watched them grow, felt the air cool against my skin. My thoughts drifted to my wife, always the diplomat. Why not just pull the weed, she'd ask, her voice a gentle chiding. But it was never about the dandelion. It was about standing firm in the face of tyranny, however small. It was about teaching my son that not every battle was worth fighting, and sometimes the greatest victories were silent. The night fell, and the stars blinked to life, each one a distant beacon of hope. In their light, I found solace. Tomorrow, Karen would return, armed with her phone and her rules. But tonight, under the vast, forgiving sky, I found peace, and in that peace, I found strength. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting stripes of light across the polished oak floor. I sipped my coffee, feeling its warmth spread through my body. A simple pleasure before the day's absurdities began. The peace was short-lived. A rustling at the door caught my attention, a notification from the all-too-familiar faux HOA committee. The paper felt heavy in my hand, burdened with the weight of Karen's latest mandate. This one, a decree about mailbox conformity, bordered on the ridiculous. It seemed our mailbox's shade of blue offended the delicate sensibilities of the committee. I chuckled, a sound that held no humor, imagining her sitting at her dining table drafting these petty rules with the fervor of a general planning a campaign. Karen's escalation was predictable, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Her dissatisfaction with mere citations and warnings had grown into a tempest of absurd regulations. Each new rule was a thread in her tapestry of control, an intricate design woven to snare those who didn't bow to her imagined authority. As I sat there, my thoughts drifted to the stories that whispered through the neighborhood, gossip carried like pollen in the spring air, each tale more embellished than the last. My wife had heard it first, how Karen spoke about us in hushed tones at the local book club, painting our family as rebels, defying her vision of suburban perfection. It was almost impressive how she crafted her narratives, each one a small fable of insubordination. I wondered how long Karen had been harboring her grievances, nurturing them like seeds until they blossomed into her current crusade. She was relentless, spinning webs of indignation that only she could see. It was her world, and the rest of us merely players miscast in her drama. The mailbox wasn't the only casualty. Our garden gnome, a cheerful sentry with a chipped hat, had been deemed an eyesore. A pink slip fluttered in the breeze one morning, accusing the poor gnome of disrupting the neighborhood's aesthetic harmony. I imagined Karen's satisfaction in delivering that particular blow, her pen a weapon of petty warfare. Despite her machinations, I remained calm. My training had taught me the value of patience, the importance of observing before acting. Karen's rules were as flimsy as paper soldiers, easily dismantled with a gentle push, but I knew the time wasn't right. Confrontation would come, as inevitable as the tide, but it required precision. In the meantime, I prepared. I gathered allies, neighbors who had grown weary of her antics. Together, we exchanged knowing glances, silent acknowledgments of the absurdity we endured. We were a quiet resistance, bound not by outrage, but by a shared understanding that some battles are won through enduring rather than escalating. As I finished my coffee, the morning sun rising higher, I tucked the latest citation into a drawer already swollen with her missives. I would deal with it in time. For now, I watched the neighborhood awaken, each house a fortress against Karen's futile campaign. I was ready, not for battle, but for the inevitable moment when her world of paper rules and whispered lies would crumble under the weight of its own ridiculousness. Until then, I would wait, quietly powerful, as the storm gathered strength. I spent the next few days in a silent, strategic calm, much like the stillness before a storm. The house remained a sanctuary, my son's laughter bouncing off the walls a comforting reminder of what truly mattered. Each giggle was a note in a melody that no one, not even a self-appointed HOA tyrant, could silence. I had learned my lessons well in the shadows of conflict. Years of service taught me the power of precision and patience. This was no different, just a different battlefield, just different adversaries. Every morning, I sat by the window with my coffee, observing. The self-proclaimed HOA enforcers strutted through the neighborhood like peacocks, clipboard in hand, armed with authority they didn't actually possess. Their pretense was almost theatrical, a comedy of errors played out in cul-de-sacs and front lawns. But beneath the farce, there was something darker, an audacity that left unchecked, threatened my family. I began documenting everything, every unwarranted visit, every baseless warning. Every time they crossed a line, I amassed evidence like a collector of rare artifacts, each piece more incriminating than the last. I knew that in battles such as these, knowledge was more potent than any weapon. My son remained blissfully unaware of the simmering tension outside. He painted dragons and spaceships, his imagination unbounded by the pettiness of our foes. He was my anchor, keeping me focused on the bigger picture. Protecting his innocence was my mission, my responsibility. At night, after he was safely tucked in, I would cross-reference my notes with neighborhood ordinances and state laws. Their actions, masquerading as rules, were nothing more than empty threats. I saw through their facade as clearly as I saw the stars on a cloudless night. And so, a plan began to take shape in my mind. Subtle, Yet, with the precision of a well-executed maneuver, I enlisted the help of neighbors, those who had watched these charades unfold with growing disbelief. Together, we were a silent majority, ready to reclaim the peace that had been disrupted. The climax came on a cool morning, dew still clinging to the grass. As they approached my driveway with yet another fabricated claim, I stepped outside, calm and collected. There was no need for confrontation, no need for raised voices. I simply handed them an envelope. Thick with the weight of their transgressions, they seemed to shrink before me, their bravado dissolving under the weight of truth. A sputter of protest broke the morning air, but it was lost to the wind. I turned away, confident in the knowledge that their game was up. The neighborhood would no longer be their stage. With the threat neutralized, life returned to its usual rhythm. The air seemed lighter, the sky a little brighter. My son continued to explore the universe from the safety of our home, his laughter undisturbed. In the quiet aftermath, I reflected on how easily power can be misused, and how fragile peace can seem, but also on the strength found in unity, in standing firm against injustice, no matter how trivial it appears. We had weathered the storm, my son and I, and in its wake, we found a stronger, more resilient community, bound not by fear, but by shared resolve, a fitting ending to a battle quietly won. The courthouse steps were cold under my feet, a stark contrast to the smoldering fire within. I had spent the past few days in a haze, my mind replaying the audacity of the fake HOA enforcers trying to claim my child as collateral damage in their petty war. But anger had its place. Strategy was better. And today, I was armed with something far more potent: the law. In the murky waters of suburban politics, it's easy to let emotions drive you, but clarity comes in quiet moments. When the world quiets just long enough for reason to take the helm, I remembered the voice of my old CO, echoing like a distant storm. Calm is a force. Use it wisely. The attorney's office had the sterile smell of newly printed paper mingled with the faint aroma of coffee. Documents lay like soldiers ready for battle. I had chosen my allies well. Brown, my lawyer, shared my penchant for the quietly powerful. He preferred the weight of evidence over the clamor of words, and as he laid out the plan, I felt the comforting embrace of control. The fake HOA had overstepped. It was one thing to enforce imaginary rules, another entirely to drag my family into their charade. I had gathered records, emails, and a particularly damning video of Karen in her oversized sunglasses, barking orders as if she commanded an army. She was the kind of person who made you question humanity's progress. The legal notice was drafted with surgical precision, each word a scalpel. It was not just a cease and desist, it was a declaration. We were done being pawns in their game. The accusations of child endangerment, the false claims of rule violations, they were going to answer for every single one. Brown's brief nod was all the assurance I needed. It was time to let the calm work its magic. The drive back home was a blur of asphalt and fading afternoon light. The neighborhood stood quiet, unaware of the storm brewing beneath its placid surface. The irony of it all was not lost on me. The guardians of community peace becoming the architects of its turmoil. My wife met me at the door, her eyes a mix of relief and steely resolve. She had weathered this storm with grace. Her strength and anchor, we didn't need words. My return, and the slight smile I offered, said enough. As night settled in, I sat on the porch, watching shadows stretch across the yard. The calm of the night was deceptive, holding its breath as if waiting for the wheels of justice to turn. I sipped my coffee, letting the warmth seep into my bones. This was the calm I cherished, the kind you earn after the storm passes, the kind that tells you everything will soon be just as it should be. Our battle was just beginning, but in that moment, I knew we had already won the most important war, the war of fear, of uncertainty. The neighborhood might still be cloaked in its illusions, But truth was a stubborn guest, and soon it would knock on every door. The air was thick with the remnants of gray clouds, a reluctant afternoon sun peeking through, casting muted shadows across the street. Our neighborhood, once vibrant with laughter and camaraderie, now stood in silent anticipation, like an audience at the climax of an unscripted drama. As I stood at the end of my driveway, my mind replayed the chaotic sequence of events, the faux HOA board's ludicrous attempt to seize control, their audacity to target my family under false pretenses, and the confrontation that followed when they discovered their immovable object had met an unstoppable force. My husband, a man of few but decisive words, had ensured they would think twice before ever considering crossing any lines again. It was a scene that would linger in the collective memory of our community forever. The confrontation left a mark, not just on those who bore witness, but on the fabric of our neighborhood itself. Each day, the tension slowly unwinds, like a tightly coiled spring finally released. The air tastes sweeter now, and the oppressive weight of worry has lifted. Neighbors nod more freely, children play a bit louder, and the usual suspects gather on porches to swap stories with a newfound bravado. There's a sense of relief, a return to a semblance of normalcy. Karen's influence had faded into the background noise. She lingered on the fringes, a shadow of her former self. Her posse of enablers dispersed like leaves in the wind. Her reign of terror had crumbled, overtaken by the truth she'd tried so hard to bury. I watched from a distance as she walked her dog down the street. Her once imperious stride now seemed halting, as if each step required a conscious effort. The neighborhood no longer looked at her with the same fear or feigned respect. Her power diminished to whispers of past misdeeds. The echoes of her previous dominance reduced to the hushed murmurs of those who once cowered. The importance of community is a lesson learned through fire. Bonds forged in adversity are stronger, more resilient. We are a tapestry of stories, woven together by both shared moments and individual battles. The children, oblivious to the conflict that had swirled around them, resumed their games in the street, their laughter a salve, a promise of better days. I marveled at their resilience, their innate ability to bounce back, a lesson for us all. I mused. We could learn from their simplicity, their unguarded joy that refused to be dampened by the complexities of grown-up conflicts. The horizon was a swath of orange and pink, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the houses. I leaned back against the porch railing, the wood warm under my palms, and allowed myself a moment of peace. A subtle shift in the breeze whispered promises of new beginnings, of a community reborn from its trials. We are stronger, more connected. Karen's legacy, now a cautionary tale, reminding us of the fragility of power and the strength found in unity. As dusk blanketed the street, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle over me, a sense of completion, and the comforting knowledge that we, as a neighborhood, had weathered the storm, united, unbroken, and ready for whatever came next.